Morning, everyone. This is Councilmember Wesley Hudson calling the Prosperity and Livability Committee to order. In chambers today, we have Councilmember Holmes and Councilmember Jefferson. We have one item today, which is a presentation from our Transportation Department on an update, the intersection of Hillcrest and Main Street, and I'll turn it over to Greg Venable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the City Council. Just to give you a little brief review, so as you guys recall, it's been a little bit since we met, but at our last meeting we discussed some improvements to Main Street. If you look on your screen there, Kimley Horn Associates, they're doing a study for us currently, and they provided a list of potential improvements. We recommended some of those improvements, some things that we can do fairly quickly, some safety improvements that we recommend, and then evaluate feasibility of additional alternatives as part of the greater Main Street corridor study. So some of the things that we recommended is, if you recall, lighting is in some of those locations out there, especially around the crosswalk that we're discussing, is could be enhanced. So staff recommended updating the street lighting in that area. Also, there's existing the RFB with double posted signs and flashers. So doing that on both sides of the sign, right now it's just one when they come on, so you can do it on both sides. Staff recommended that. That's a cost of $10,000 to $25,000. And then also installing a concrete median, refuge island, a safe zone, if you will, for pedestrians. They cross half the street, safety area in the middle, and then cross the other half of the street. And that's recommended at $15,000. So the total estimated cost of those improvements is $45,000, give or take. But then we also, you guys had requested us to take a look at the Hawk signal, or a full signalized intersection. So we went back to DOT. You guys asked us to go back to DOT, got some more input from them, and what they've told us is they are agreeable tentatively to a Hawk signal with some conditions associated with that. So some of the things that they would like to see is, obviously with the Hawk signal, you have Hillcrest Place coming out there, and there's no way to, with those cars coming out, there's no control for cars coming out of Hillcrest Place. So the actual current location of that crosswalk would have to change and move. They want it at least 100 feet to the south. So, so if we look at, can I get to the internet here, Ryan? Is it? There we go. So actually, if you go 100 feet to the south there, it puts you just about in the middle of Alex's House restaurant there, and you got driveways. It almost functions as one driveway. I mean, there's a little bit of curbing in between, but for all intents and purposes, it's one driveway. So that's not the best location. So if you move it to the next available property, there's a utility pole in this area right here, and it's very narrow. There's a driveway there going into those apartments. So the best location would be to be moving it further south. Right here at Guilford Avenue would probably be the best location moving forward. You have Guilford Avenue, that's one way, so you don't have traffic coming out there. If you did, it'd be the same situation with Hillcrest Place on the other side. So they've asked for additional PED counts in the area, so we've provided that to them. Kind of waiting to hear back on that, see what they say there. We did a count in 2000, just basically this time last year, about a year ago. We provided that data to them. It does show turning movement counts coming out of Hillcrest Place, turning movement counts coming out of the driveways, and then pedestrian counts as well. That was taken over a 48-hour period, so it started on Thursday, and they stopped it on Saturday. So it kind of gets that Friday, Saturday time frame when you see more pedestrians out there typically. So, we're kind of waiting on that. A general cost of installing the Hawk is going to be anywhere from $75,000 to $150,000. Again, depending, like we talked about with the signal, what do you want to see out there? So most of the times those are done on mast arms, but you can do them just like the signal is out there now with wood poles and span wire. Depending on if city forces do it versus a contractor, so all that goes into that cost difference. So, so that's kind of where we stand now at that. Just to give you an update on the study itself. So. They're currently, Kimley Horn is providing the traffic analysis. So we did get an email back from them last week, basically showing their traffic numbers. We're in the process of reviewing that right now. Their next steps are to develop alternatives. They have to do an access management plan, concept designs as well. Probably in the September, October timeframe, we'll come back to you guys for a presentation to a public meeting and then a presentation to council to get you your feedback and input on that as well. So we haven't seen any real steady alternatives, anything we can speak to yet, but that will be coming. So maybe sometime in September, we can get in front of you guys for a presentation. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
When you say is that the comprehensive plan that we're doing on North Main?
Right, that's looking at
That's
from
the
Lexington.
entire-
Yeah, and it goes to around Church Street, Church Avenue there. So it looks at the whole section, not just this portion, but it takes into consideration that. And it's looking at, wholesale changes if we want to do something, if we want to narrow it, kind of what we see that as the future. So it's got some recommendations in there. Obviously the big issue is going to be your traffic on Main Street. We have 24,000 cars a day out there. So how do you handle that? There's going to be, whatever we do out there, there'll be some pretty long queues that are going to back up either direction. So that's kind of what they're working through now is how do they handle those large queues and kind of the level of service. So they did a time frame. So the horizon year is 2045, but they also looked at the interim of 2030 and kind of looking at how that operates. Those signals will operate through Main Street during that time frame if we decide to do something through this area. So that'll all be taken into consideration.
But that comprehensive report comes in October?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? I think that's just prudent for us to wait until October to discuss the future. It would be silly for us to change an intersection before the report came in, so.
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, they're going to have some pretty substantial data in there and some alternatives, so we can look and assess those, and we can go forward from that point. So.
Okay. If we move this crosswalk further south, I mean, we're getting down to the point where we're getting close to Ferris Avenue anyway.
Right.
Are we just being redundant with another crosswalk there?
But potentially, I think that that was where the location. If they wanted, that's where they agreed to put it in. So they didn't seem to have an issue with that. Okay. I think that getting it further, that does put it closer to Ferris, but I think it kind of gets you more kind of midpoint maybe between the two. I haven't looked at it in detail, but yeah, I mean, you have those signals and they're timed, right? So anything like that's going to kind of throw off some of that timing. So we'll have to consider that too. If we put this in, and how do we account for our progressions on Main Street with the signal in there? So that's something that we'll have to look at too.
Is there any talk of Brown Truck now has 3 entrances to the same parking lot?
Yep.
Are they talking about consolidating those properties?
So DOT, I guess they have, with their building to the north there that they're doing some construction in, so they had to put a new water meter in, so they had to get an encroachment from DOT. Well, DOT basically told them that whatever goes in that building, future, if they're going to do something with the front part of it, anything has to come back to DOT, they're going to ask them to consolidate driveways. So that will be something they'll have to do at that time.
Okay.
Greg, the slide earlier, is that the total cost, or are we going to see other costs in the comprehensive plan?
Well, there'll be additional costs, right? So that's just the prices were interim improvements. So the comprehensive plan, whatever is determined, whatever concept we go with, we've got to decide to do something.
Yeah.
You're going to have to narrow the roadway, restripe. So there'll be additional. You probably want to resurface the whole thing because you're going to have, if you do on-street parking or whatever comes out of it, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be some additional charge, cost associated with that. So it could be. I mean, I don't know what the cost estimate. They'll have some of that in there as well. So
Yeah, it's just going to determine on what that option looks like and all the components of that option.
Exactly.
That it's going to.
Yep. Some of this, we looked at pedestrian safety. We also look at, if you're going to do something like that, you want to move the curb line. So, some of that can get pretty expensive. So, what do we, you guys as a council, what do we want that to look like in the future, right? So there could be some pretty major costs associated with it, depending on what's,
Yeah, I think multiple options. I mean, in our desire to attain the most walkable area that we can, I think honestly we have to take a look at the most comprehensive approach that we can take.
Sure.
And I understand that sometimes it's costly, but not doing it, I think in the long run is probably more costly.
Right.
So, looking forward to seeing the options.
Sure.
And to be clear, the 45K that we looked at with the staff recommendations for lighting, signs, flashing, refuge island, all that we're waiting to, right? Until we hear back
I mean, that's your decision. I mean, we could put some of that stuff in. I guess, you know, you guys need to make that call if you want to wait or to do, you know, wait till the study comes out to make those improvements.
Based on what you know now about this study, do you feel that there's a chance if we do these, that study will tell us that wasn't the best thing to do?
As far as the interim improvements?
Yeah, like these, I mean, it's only a waste of money,
Yeah.
right? If we do it and then the study comes out, and the study says something contrary to what things are. Do we feel that right now the study supports these interim improvements?
For sure, yeah. I think this,
It's really just kind of enacting something early.
Right.
The study's already done
Yeah.
something we need to do.
I think those will be included as part of the overall study, right? Those are interim improvements. Now, maybe something where, you know, kind of what that final design is. Some of those treatments may have to come out potentially, like, you know, the median or, you know, it just depends. But I think that what they tried to do with those interim improvements is make sure that you can incorporate those into the long-term plan, whatever that may be.
So, of the interim improvements, which ones would you feel absolutely comfortable making now? Because you know that they will be included and not have to be removed?
Right.
Which ones are those?
Well, some of the simple ones, of course, is your lighting, right? Anytime you can improve the lighting out there. You know, I've been out there several times, and there are some spots that are a little dark, maybe. So any additional lighting, that's relatively inexpensive, right? That's an easy one, I think, to do. You know, the enhanced signs, all that's, you know, it's all pretty easy to get done, so to install. So I think all of them are good. Obviously, your refuge island,
Sure.
you still have to cross, you know,
Yeah.
but it does give you a safe spot. I mean, we've got similar condition down at GTCC on South Main Street. That's kind of the same thing that we're talking about, where people can cross the street and then they have an area there where they feel, you know, safe. You know, maybe
Yeah.
perception, but it's, you know, you have that safety feeling of being in an area where you're okay. So, but your lighting and your, you know, doubling the signs, those are pretty easy. The median refuge item is a little more expensive, but I think all are good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so sorry, I just want to get clear on something, make sure we're getting this question answered.
Yeah.
And my question too. So, we want to be, I think we get that all of them are easy, all of them are relatively inexpensive. I think we're trying to figure what are the ones that when you put them, like if we do now.
Yeah.
We're not going to come back later.
And have
say,
to undo.
"Man, that was a complete waste of money."
Yeah.
Which ones do you feel that when we do it, the study, like, we're not going to go back and
Yeah,
tear it up? We're
yeah.
not going to come back and pull it up. That's what
Right. Well, I guess like I said, the lighting and the signage, they're not going to take that out.
Yeah.
The median island possibly could change, depending on what's recommended. So that one would be something that maybe you'd have to come back in and tear out with the project. So the two lighting projects, the enhanced overhead lighting and then the signage.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of the low-hanging fruit stuff that is gonna proceed regardless, stuff that we can do now
Right.
to make some improvements in that area. You know, if we can move forward to make improvements now, stuff that we know is gonna carry forward, I see that as a relatively good investment since it's a small dollar amount.
Right.
And so I think that's, you know, prudent for us to proceed in that way.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we go ahead and approve staff to do the lighting and then the signs and flashers project. I think there were the two items, and not to do the refuge island right now.
Yeah.
That's my motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. I will say the refuge island is actually the thing that I think will make the most difference.
I agree.
Yeah, well,
You know, for the amount of money, if you're going to spend 20,000 or 25,000, I would spend the 25,000 and put a barrier in the middle that people are afraid of and say, oh, wow, if I hit that, that's going to hurt. That visually makes an impact. The lights aren't, to me, you know, my studying says the lights aren't nearly as effective as putting something in the middle of the road, especially if you have plants in the middle or something else that breaks up that.
And we're going to have to, like, we'll have to look
Yeah.
currently. So if you put that island in there, how does that work, you know, with turning movements and things, with the driveways? That's another thing to consider, right? But I think in that location, it'll work, but we just have to look and make sure there's no issues with that as well, so.
Yeah, Chairman, my concern, and I agree with you 100%.
yeah.
My concern is we do the refuge island, study comes back, and then once they get into the work, you have to rip up that island.
Yeah.
And that's $25,000, that's gone. The $20,000 that we look at spending for the lighting and signs flashers is $20,000 that we'll make the investment on now, and it'll continue, it'll be there. And so I agree 100% with what you're saying. I do. I just,
And I agree also. I feel like it's between now and the comprehensive plan in October. I feel like if we chose not to do the refuge island and then the comprehensive plan comes back and says it's absolutely needed, I think that would, I think that would save us, an opportunity from spending money that we may not have to undo.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Damon DeCane, Assistant City Manager. So just to provide something else for consideration is, staff's comfortable recommending all three of the treatments for the intersection. And I completely understand your concern about maybe installing the refuge island and having to take it out later. But I don't know that we're going to have the ability to implement the study, because it's a large study, and as the director said, it could be pretty expensive. So you'll get probably a year or two or more of benefit out of that island. And for the small expense that it really takes to put it in, it's probably worth, the city's effort to go ahead and install it now. And even if it has to be removed later, the time benefit will equal the investment easily or exceed it.
That's a good point. Yep. With the recommended improvements from the study being something that's years out from now, I could see where having, a couple years of increased safety right there is certainly worth the cost of $25K. I guess in my mind, I was worried we get a study back in October.
Yeah.
So that means in a few months, we're taking that island up, and I didn't want to spend $25K to tear the island up in a few months.
Of course. Well, I will say the improvements to Main Street in Lexington took 10 years to implement, so I'm not saying it's going to be that long, but I'm just saying it sometimes takes an inordinate amount for especially
Transportation projects, yeah.
State roads, I
yeah.
don't want to harp on state roads, but state roads take a lot
They do.
longer. This is a major.
Yeah, Chairman, if I may, I'd like to amend my motion to include all three of the staff recommendations for approval.
I'll second.
Okay with that?
I'll
All
second.
right, there's a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? And then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Greg.
Sure.
Great presentation. Appreciate your patience with us. Working through all
No,
that
thank
stuff,
you.
too.
I appreciate it.
Mr. Ferguson.
Greg Ferguson, Deputy City Manager. So I'm going to do an update on parking in general and then answer a couple questions about parking, paid parking. So we included in the packet for today the parking analysis by Kimley Horn that came out as a draft in May. And some of the early opportunities that were identified on page 7 was to add some additional on-street parking, add some additional parking on the lot on the corner of English and Lindsay. And then it really didn't mention this, but there's an opportunity as soon as we close on the church to sign the church parking as public parking as well. So with the stipulation that only on Sunday morning will the church have access to the parking lot, but the rest of the time it's public. Of the recommendations, there's a number of on-street parking locations they identified as possible, but most of those we probably don't want to do quite yet. Some of those are on Elm, so they'll be addressed by the RAISE grant. Others are already in use, like on Gatewood in front of the Rocker Stadium, and so potentially striping that might reduce the number of cars that are parked there. So we are going to do some enhancements, some signage. We've talked this week about some warning signs because we've had baseballs actually hit cars. So you kind of park at your own risk behind the baseball stadium. But hopefully that doesn't happen further. One area that we could look at for some on-street parking that's identified is a further extension of the West English parking that we added on-street parking. So it's possible that we could do that in the short term. But frankly, we've got adequate parking all over the district right now. It's just, you got to walk a block in some cases. So really the earliest and the biggest change that you may see there is the provision of temporary parking at what we say is PERCO. When PERCO is demoed sometime after the end of the year, then staff will be ready to move forward with some additional surface parking there, which will, serve that entire district. So those are early recommendations. I'll be happy to take questions on those, or if y'all want to discuss
When
it.
does the property at First Baptist come available, and how many spaces do we gain there?
These are 153. They're in use right now. The church really has not policed the parking, and some of the Bedrock tenants are parking over there on a weekly basis. So it's currently in use.
Yeah.
It also serves as parking for the businesses on Church, so people park over and utilize that as well.
Okay.
So we're set to close October.
First week of October.
You said when?
First week of October.
The other one that is kind of in the works down the road would be parking on MLK near the hotel. So once that site plan gets kind of finalized, we can look at how that might be striped as well. Any questions? So moving on to recommended next steps, that was page 50. This really kind of gives a summary of things that we have teed up for the future. So the first one was to pave that English Avenue surface lot, so we'll work on that and kind of have a plan. The thought process at the staff level is that that might be a little bit higher level of temporary parking than the VIP lot, which doesn't have a lot of amenities or islands or anything else. So being that it's next to a new development there, that's major investment, we may try to up the aesthetics of that, even though it's temporary. Add some on-street parking was another big bullet, so we know where those are. We'll do that as needed. One that we've already somewhat implemented is with the budget you adopted this past budget season, fees were increased in the parking deck. So the daily fee went up, and then also the monthly fees were adjusted, which was pretty long overdue. We need to continue to study that. One recommendation, one thing that the staff is kind of looking at is we really have not focused on the revenue side of parking in High Point. So we need to kind of move our thought process toward more of an enterprise fund. Now, how does it pay for itself? If we're going to build more a deck or decks, then what's the structure look like to pay the debt on that? So we'll be working over time to kind of move into that mindset. Parking is not free, somebody's paying for it. So citywide parking demand assessment, that's just really kind of overall, we've focused on the catalyst area, but what happens when you start making changes and it impacts the market area? So we want to get a lot of feedback and input from certainly the market authority, from some of the showrooms. What would that look like? How would that be set up? Probably won't use parking meters. Technology's passed it by, so it'll probably be more like a parking app with signage if we get to that point. And so that'll be coming back for discussion about what could that look like. And so there's no foregone conclusions, but we do know that there's a lot of opportunity to manage the parking assets better in the downtown area. And with that, I'll just kind of stop and get feedback or questions. There's not a timeline. There's not really a hard timeline. We'll be happy to take input and suggestions on that if you want to move it quickly or if you want to go slow and methodical with it.
I think the raise grant and the work on Elm Street is step one, pretty much to everything from the core out. Yeah. So until that part is solid, it's hard to make decisions elsewhere. So I think we have adequate parking at the Baptist Church now. So glad to know that's coming online.
Your statements regarding the parking garage, are you thinking that's something that we can enact? I guess like we sort of tier it and graduate it up to wherever that top number it is, or are we thinking go ahead and, promote that, whatever that fee is, right up to that number?
We've instituted already.
Yeah, so it went from $7 a day for the daily rate to 10 in the budget, and it went to $50 a month.
Yeah, and the $50 is basically depending on how many spaces you lease, so that number can drop, but it's currently 35, or it was 35. So the minimum now will be 40, depending on the number of spaces that you lease. So up to a maximum of 50 right now. Just to give you an idea, like Winston-Salem and Greensboro, they're charging anywhere from $90 to $100 currently on their decks. So that's something we can look at again if we need to adjust moving forward. We can take a look at that too. So.
Forgive me if I missed this, but from the revenue side of parking, does that include metered parking?
We do not have any metered parking
Yeah,
where we actually have quarters or.
Yeah, I know I didn't see any in the, I don't see any in the city anywhere, but is, in terms of addressing revenue, is that something that's been discussed or not?
I think that's part of the overall conversation, kind of have a comprehensive look at what is the philosophy of the city. You know, the courtesy parking was installed, I think, back in the 80s maybe, and things have changed. I mean, we think, you know, nobody's working in the showrooms, but there's a lot of people
Yeah, it's a lot.
working in the showrooms on a daily basis. Some of the showrooms have their own parking, others do not. So, you know, how does that work? There's no end goal as this is what we want to do. It's
Right.
just, we need to figure out what the philosophy is long-term and how we enact that and how it works with the market.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If I can chime in on that piece, because I think it's a great conversation.
Yeah.
I think, to what our deputy manager's saying regarding what our philosophy is. In some ways, and I could be wrong on this, but I think our philosophy may have to both look at the short-term, mid-term, and
Yeah.
long-term. I think that in the short term, and probably in the midterm, our philosophy is that we still have a growing downtown.
Yeah.
And if we had right now a bunch of pay-to-park set up, then we'd probably be having a conversation that says, could we incentivize more folks coming to downtown
Right.
by removing that, right?
Yeah.
Right now, we already have it as courtesy
Yeah.
parking. So I think in the short and midterm, that courtesy parking continues to think, I think right now,
It's a draw. It's a net.
it helps us.
A draw.
My fear was that at some point it could be a barrier.
Yeah.
But I think long-term, and this is, I think when our downtown is really thriving and high demand for folks to come down there and it's really competitive for folks to want to park, I think at that point, maybe you do look at, I mean, as you said, somebody's paying for parking.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that you've got a ton of visitors. At that point, maybe you reconsider it. But for now, I think in the short and midterm, our philosophy is that we've got to draw folks to our downtown.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Councilman Joe. And that was in the lines of what I was thinking is, right now, as we're trying to incentivize patronage downtown, we don't want anything that would necessarily deter folks from coming downtown. But once we get to a sustained growth of visitors downtown, addressing revenue from parking, could that be something that we look at down the road? I certainly don't think it's prudent right now, but down the road as a revenue model, possibly.
Damon made a good point yesterday, and I would repeat it today, just revenue generation is not the only goal of metered parking or paid parking. It's also asset management, so you want certain spaces to turn over so many times per day.
Yeah.
So for instance, on a street that has very limited on-street parking and you've got 2 or 3 or 4 retail locations, you'd like to see those turn over versus having someone park there for 8 hours.
Yeah.
And we know that example exists. So that could be some interim step at some point down the road if we want to manage our parking assets, that you do a beta test somewhere and, you know, try to figure out what your implementation might be for something like that.
And I'll chime in and I'll be the devil's advocate, because if you actually read about downtown parking, the nail in the coffin for a walkable city is to have free parking. That's how you absolutely destroy a downtown, is give free parking. Because of what Greg just said, if you have a business, Church Street, all those businesses on Church, the businesses on Elm that rely on, like Blooming Board, that's 100% walk up. That's a walk up retail. So those 8-10 spaces on Church Street, if people park on those 8 or 10 spaces on Church Street, her business is killed all day because no one can park to walk into her business, pick up their charcuterie and drive away. So downtown parking is crucial to the success of a downtown. So although it seems to make sense that, yeah, you want everybody to be free, the turnover is what's the important part. If you put everything in Winston-Salem, and I hate to always bring up Winston-Salem, but their downtown is 30-minute parking. Because if you're going into Camino's Coffee and you're sitting there for 4 hours, well, there's a car sitting there for 4 hours, and then people that come in to pick up coffee can't. There's not that turnover. So it seems counterintuitive But the best thing you can do to make a walkable city is to turn over traffic. So I think the minimum that we should do is create a walkable district, which we already have that district around the stadium. So if nothing else, simply make that district 30-minute, 1-hour parking with meter, with an enforcement. So that's my 2 cents. And I think we're there because businesses are already making that investment to be there. The Blooming Board, she's already there. She needs some help turning over Church Street. There's my 2 cents.
Greg, what is could businesses, I don't know, secure those parking spaces? Could she do that? And I don't know, purchase those parking spaces strictly for her business and set the duration herself?
So Chairman and I had a little sidebar conversation earlier, a couple days ago. My recommendation would be that we not make any permanent changes to Church Street until we get through the raised design process, because we're going to make some kind of substantial change to Church. We don't know what that might be because we need to really look at it and get input and feedback. Church could be narrowed. Church could have more on-street parking. Church could be one-way. There's just a lot of things that could happen in conjunction with the city's acquisition of the Church property itself. So in the short term, you know, other than maybe you could put some on-street parking on Church eastbound, there's going to be adequate parking in the parking lot over there, we believe, once we sign it as public parking. And people, customer base, if they can just get accustomed to pulling in there and crossing the street, hopefully that'll be supportive of the businesses there.
And I use them kind of as a general example because everybody knows where they are and what happens with it. Yeah, until the raise grant comes through and we do Elm Street, I don't think we need to do anything downtown, but I think we need to get in that mindset. You know, turning over parking turns over patronage, and that's what retail needs.
Anything else?
Anything else?
Chairman,
Please.
I don't have anything else on the parking piece, but I would love to entertain your thoughts on if in the next couple of months, could we have another conversation regarding green space in downtown?
Absolutely. We actually, you know, Greg and I have lots of offline conversations, and that's one of the conversations that we keep having is as we do this, here's where we need a park.
Yeah.
So yes, absolutely. I'd love to bring that to you.
Is that something, I guess, from a staff standpoint, I know I literally brought it up out of the blue.
Yeah.
Is that something maybe in September or October that we could hear from staff on, like where we've been in these discussions, what our potential updates are, what some thinking of options are? I know we don't have options right now, but what our thinking of how our options are beginning to form up. I know that's a piece that comes up from folks who are beginning to really enjoy our downtown. As you said, they're really beginning to enjoy it, and they're just looking forward for that added piece of green space.
We can. As you mentioned, there are a number of options that have been floated, so we can kind of bring those back and share what those are and have that conversation.
But thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that's a very important piece to the puzzle. Anything further? If not, thank you all for a great meeting. Meeting adjourned.